Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Day 1 is done in Brazil, massive for the championship. Max Verstappen not a happy man as to the way that Red Bull set up their car this weekend. That's left him very compromised in terms of his championship challenge. They will need to make major improvements after the sprint race tomorrow if he wants any chance of catching the McLarens. But what was happening at the Ferrari garage? An absolute disaster from start to finish today in practice. During all of the qualifying sessions, Hamilton eventually out earlier than he would have wanted, but it's not like Charles Leclerc was anywhere either. What's happened to their pace or anything this weekend? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. There might be more drama with Hamilton as well to come. Few things to get into. Starting with Aston Martin, they were actually a factor today, as they have been around Brazil before, and I would expect that to continue the case to some degree through the rest of the weekend. If there was any track where Aston were probably going to be decent from now to the end of the year, this was probably the one. But there is plenty of talk that it's not all sunshine and rainbows internally. In fact, Adrian Newey and the team have made major overhauls. Now, this doesn't necessarily sound good. I mean, when you're making 7 top-level dismissals just a few weeks before the new car is set to be debuted, it doesn't really send a great picture for what Aston Martin's car next year is going to be like. But look, Adrian Newey is the managing technical partner, or whatever they're calling him. He clearly has a lot of decision-making power. The reason why he was brought in by Lawrence Stroll was to build a technical team that can actually win. Eric Blandan, who I believe came in alongside Dan Fallows, who's also been got rid of, he's gone. Their aero director, another one of their former design chiefs, is gone. They say that we are carrying out a technical restructuring ahead of the new season, which will be announced shortly, but apparently they are wiping the floor with a lot of their top technical guys, which is very interesting, maybe is going to be beneficial in the long term. But yeah, Adrian Newey is cooking, whatever, maybe with the car, but also in terms of some of the decisions behind the scenes. Just a couple of quick updates on Mexico. Obviously, it's a couple of weekends ago now, but still, the turn 1 shenanigans have continued to cause lots of drama. George says he doesn't like that corner at all because there's no multiple lines you can take, like in Bahrain, to give yourself the switchback opportunity on the run to turn 4. So he made that point. But he says, look, in Monza, if you miss the chicane, you've got to take the polystyrene blocks, which slows you down. He thinks there should be something similar mandated in Mexico, as Hamilton went on to say there's no clarity on their decisions, because George was like, I can't believe they got away with that cutting turn 1. That's probably a part of a bigger issue, transparency and accountability, and also the secrecy that decisions are made in the background. Hamilton goes on to say, I don't know if they are aware of the weight of their decisions. They ultimately steer careers, can decide the results of championships, as you have seen in the past. So strong words from Hamilton. Again, he's in trouble with the FIA today. A couple of other updates next year. We know that F1 are considering a few things, such as mandating 2 stops in every Grand Prix, not just Monaco. Couple of other ideas. On a sprint weekend, if there's a red flag in practice, extend the practice session by 15 minutes, up to 15 minutes. That sounds reasonable enough. Maybe extend the length of Q1, Q2 by a couple of minutes. It seems relatively negligible to me. Whether I do that in the sprint could be interesting, or just in the main qualifying sessions. There's also this idea, standardize the duration of races so they last approximately the same amount of time, or maybe at least so the races aren't so short. Now, Domenicali might say, short races, great, it's good for the TikTok brain attention spans. I'm not in that camp. I would argue, though, that, for example, Monza is usually a very short Grand Prix because it's so fast. It's 300 kilometers, right? They race. They go to 300k. Whenever they finish the next lap, that's how they decide. But I think you could argue we should have more laps around Monza. Don't know what you guys think about that. Something to think about. Of course, the fuel tanks can only take so much, so there's that to consider as well. Something to contemplate for next year. The other big rumour is around Qatar. We know that it's the most challenging Grand Prix for the Pirelli compound, not because the rubber degrades, but because the actual structure of the tyre is put under serious stress by the way that the curbing especially is designed in Qatar. Wasn't long ago they mandated like a two-stop race, and it could be, was it a three-stop race? Whatever it was, 3 stints anyway. They might mandate it again. That's the big rumor anyway, that they are possibly going to force a maximum stint length again in Qatar. So every driver anyway is going to be mandated to do 2 stops. So it would be pretty interesting. I think you could make the argument that the teams are aware it's problematic on tyres. You should let them decide whether they take the risk or not. I think the issue is, typically when you're looking at tyres, whether a tyre is going to puncture, you're looking at, damn, the rubber's really wearing down, we might need to bring him in. Whereas in Qatar, they're not puncturing because the rubber is so worn, they're puncturing because structurally the curbing just rips them apart, which is almost impossible to predict when that's going to happen. Of course, it's more likely to happen as the tyre becomes more worn. So something to think about there as well. The teams will have to keep an eye on. There's also talk about the weather this weekend. We're going to discuss qualifying for the sprint in a second, but it's going to rain probably tomorrow and quite possibly quite hard. Sunday, it's not so clear. Max says it's cooked, and to be fair, if you look at all the races this year where it rains, the McLaren does seem to have an advantage in those conditions. This idea of, rain being the great equalizer, that's probably true to some degree, but certainly not to the full degree that people would maybe like to believe. It is pretty clear that in certain conditions, some cars are still very much better than others, although it does exemplify the talents of particular drivers, as we saw around the circuit last year. But we do have a storm warning coming in. There's a severe storm warning until the end of tomorrow. They're expecting a lot of rainfall, and they're expecting a lot of winds, and potentially even hail. Now, I said a couple of days ago that it looks like it's going to rain, but it might not be too bad, so at least we should get some racing. I don't know if we're going to get any racing. I mean, look, we should. I'm sure that we'll get some sort of racing. But I'll just briefly look at, again, I'm on the BBC here, so it is what it is. But the sprint, so this is today, irrelevant. Tomorrow, the sprint is happening relatively early doors. It's 1 p.m. UK time, but for, that means it's significantly earlier in the morning. You can see here the winds, I don't know, relatively reasonable. We've got a couple of raindrops on the cloud emoji here. So, yeah, there's definitely something going to be happening. And then possibly we've got some storms later in the day. So it might be heavy rain in the morning when the sprint is. But then for qualifying, it could be thunderstorms. So I think it is going to be disrupted. Like, maybe not disrupted in the sense that there's going to be delays and red flags or whatever, but rain is going to affect the proceedings tomorrow. Sunday, just to quickly look at, is currently looking more reasonable. So again, today's qualifying session for the sprint tomorrow will have had to consider some element of, okay, what setup do we want for tomorrow's rain, right? Do we run a bit more downforce in quali today to try and set ourselves up better for the sprint tomorrow? Because after tomorrow's sprint, you can change the car as much as you like. Go back to however you please for regular qualifying and then the main race on the Sunday where it might well be dry. So that would have been very relevant today. Let's talk about qualifying though. Oscar Piastri says, not the case when it comes to sabotage, right? Now, like, you think Piastri's going to say, oh yeah, the team, they've been giving me Lando's old used tyres, like I've got no chance, they've tweaked the floor or something. He's obviously not going to say that, and he says, look, I've looked at the last couple of weekends, I've got clear answers on why my pace has been struggling. There even has been a little bit of talk as to whether Piastri and his team, Mark Webber, are having conversations elsewhere. It is interesting, I will say, that Red Bull, those are the only seats still available, right? Tsunoda's not locked in at Red Bull, neither's Hadjar, neither is Lawson, Lindblad, or whatever's going on at the sister team either. So it has raised a couple of thoughts. There were rumours not long ago that if Red Bull were to lose Max, they would look to get Oscar. Apparently they might look to get Oscar anyway. I don't really know if I can put too much theory behind this. Difficult to see a world where Piastri leaves McLaren for next season. I mean, that would be so remarkable, especially if he wins the championship, which is very much still possible. So I'm not going to say more on that for now, but practice gets underway and Piastri was looking damn good. I mean, he goes purple, purple, purple here, puts in a 1:10.1. Lando eventually went a smidge quicker, but that was about 10 minutes later in the session. So in terms of track evolution, that was still looking good for Oscar. But when we got to qualifying, he was still good, But again, it's, Lando has taken a step. That's very clear to see. Hamilton, Sonoda was hit the wall briefly. Hamilton had a big spin at the end of the session as well. There was even an incident involving Verstappen and Russell. That will come to no surprise to anyone. There's also this note is that Yuki again doesn't have the latest spec. So 0 upgrades this weekend. None of the teams have brought anything new for Brazil. But Yuki still doesn't have the new floor. So again, it is a newer floor, right? Like there's been plenty of floor upgrades that Yuki has had. But Verstappen has the latest one and only Verstappen as it stands. So just another reason why, of course, Yuki is in a difficult spot. But when Yuki was out in SQ1 today, I think it was pretty clear Red Bull did not have all of their ducks in a row. Now, Ferrari, they did the first practice session today, and they changed downforce levels. So Hamilton was running significantly lower downforce than Leclerc was, and it looked like they were going to split that, actually, going into qualifying, because there's a big compromise to be made around Brazil. The first sector, the last sector, it's really nice to have the straight line speed. The middle sector, you need every single ounce of downforce you can get. In the rain, the higher downforce is probably preferable, but also it's difficult to overtake in the rain a lot of the time because you don't get DRS, right? So sometimes maybe an extra bit of straight line speed can be nice, and if you're an absolute slug tractor on the straights, it's going to be difficult to make an overtake happen, but you'll have more grip when you break into the corner, so maybe you can send a dive bomb, that type of stuff. But it did seem like they'd changed their mind on this, right? Going into sprint qualifying, they put on the same wing on Hamilton and Leclerc, and seemingly the same terrible setup, because they certainly had their issues there. So Lando just smidges ahead of Oscar in practice. Again, it was a huge gap to the rest of the field, which is not uncommon for McLaren in the final practice session. Of course, there was only one this time. They usually do put the burners on for whatever reason. They've obviously got their reasons. But look at the bottom 4. Verstappen, Leclerc, Hamilton, Sonoda. Like, not a great sign for those teams. Now, the Ferraris, for some reason, were just doing laps on the hard tyre, which I don't really understand why, unless they want to save a load of softs for qualifying, and they believe that the soft maybe is going to be the critical race tyre later in the weekend, possibly. But, the compounds are very hard this weekend. It's probably harder than they need to be. I don't see the hards being a particularly relevant tyre. And it's not like they've got so few tyres they can't afford to use any other ones, because it's probably going to rain tomorrow and there's going to be lots of intermediate usage. So I don't really know what Ferrari were cooking there. Red Bull were obviously faster than they'd shown, based, they clearly had a bit more to come, but how much? That was the question. So we get into qualifying, and Norris, Piastri, pretty neck and neck early doors. Hamilton, though, immediately 4 tenths off. Leclerc, 5 tenths off. The Ferrari was just nowhere again. And the question was, who's actually going to be the contender to the McLarens? Is it going to be Max? Is it going to be the Mercedes? So again, it's kind of remarkable what we've seen around here, that on one weekend it'll be the Ferrari looking kind of racy, like in Mexico. This weekend it looks like it's the Mercedes, right back in the mix. And maybe that's expected. Ferrari don't go very well around Brazil historically. Mercedes certainly do. Russell got his first Grand Prix win here back in 2022. Verstappen then goes P1. A good few minutes later, they're all on the mediums here because they can only use one set of medium tyres for the entire sprint qualifying session. So there's a trade-off there between you burn the fuel off, but also you use a bit of the tyre rubber. So often it can be a little bit difficult to improve drastically, but you do get some track evolution in play as well. So Max goes P1. Then Norris goes again on another lap and goes P1 again. 3.5 tenths up on anyone. And again, Norris, it's remarkable how he just nailed everything today again, right? Like, I think we can talk about Piastri getting closer and doing a better job today, and some of the other excellent jobs that many of the other drivers did. Obviously, we've got to talk about Max and Lewis as well, because they were in some drama. But Lando just has nailed everything, right? Like, he'll put in a lap, which is good, maybe not spectacular. He'll then go again and improve, purple. Then he'll do it again. And basically, he did that every qualifying session today. He did the same thing in Mexico. It's very impressive, the level that Norris is currently driving at. And look, it's a long weekend. It's a tricky weekend. But, he's looked like, for the last 2-3 weeks, the clear championship favourite with the way that he's currently driving, and it seems like he's handling the pressure of being the championship leader pretty well again so far. But as I say, we may be speaking too soon. Tsunoda then comes across the line and only goes P13, at this point about 5-6 tenths down on where Max was, and that was not going to be good enough with other drivers improving behind him. So, you know, with Yuki out in SQ1, it was pretty clear that Red Bull was not in a good spot. It didn't look great in practice, of course. We thought there was probably more to come. Their race pace looked okay, but we know that qualifying this year is critical for many reasons. Dirty air, the closeness of the cars in terms of performance, all that stuff. So, you know, qualifying still is very important. You do not sacrifice qualifying this year for race runs unless you're at a very easy circuit to overtake, such as, let's say, maybe a Spa. Even then. So Yuki's down. It looks like he's going to be out. That's where he was. Again, a lot of credit, I think, goes to Ollie Behrman this session. His second SQ performance in SQ2 didn't quite hit the same heights because he didn't really get the chance to do another lap, and we'll discuss why in a second. But Ocon was out in P19. Behrman was 8 tenths to the good with a lap that was good enough for P6. So again, he's backed up a pretty great weekend. Like, he's probably not going to score points in the sprint, but it's worth shouting out that he backed up a great weekend. Leclerc was 11th. Hamilton at this point was 13th. Lando goes purple again. I mean, he improved another 10th on his third run on that same set of mediums. So that was already pretty impressive. And I think it was quite clear at that point that Lando was the heavy favourite for pole. Hamilton, again, on his like third run or whatever, I think it may have been his second run, he was 6 tenths down, good enough for 10th, but yeah, still so rough for those guys. Antonelli squeaks through. Colapinto out after getting confirmed actually today. That was made official that Colapinto will drive alongside Pierre Gasly at Alpine next season. Of course, that news has been coming for some time. Gasly did make it through though. Antonelli just got through, which is very important for him, as we'll see in a second. So SQ2 gets underway, and Fernando Alonso puts in a mega lap, a 109.3 he put in here, which was really quick, and even the McLaren boys were not able to touch that. They did their runs, they were, you know, half a tenth off in Norris and Piastri's case, respectively. Again, Max was that 3.5, 4 tenths down on this time Fernando Alonso in an Aston Martin, and even Stroll wasn't doing too bad either. So that was a bad sign, of course. But then we got this moment. So both Leclerc and Hamilton on the run down to the second kind of loop, as it were, in that middle sector. Tricky corner. They both lock up the front left tyre in an identical way about 5 seconds after one another, right? So Leclerc comes in, he locks up the front left, gets it turned in, but just about. Hamilton comes in, locks up the front left. Same corner, same situation. So, like, it's difficult, isn't it? Two phenomenal drivers like Leclerc and Hamilton just hounding around a Ferrari within a few hundredths of one another, just not having a great time. And I can't imagine the Ferrari guys in the garage are either. So their first runs weren't very good as a result of that. They weren't going to be very good anyway. And then then going into the final runs, we had Hamilton deciding, because they've just done their laps here. They're in the box. There's 4 minutes left. And Hamilton was told, you know, come into the box. We're going to box you, we're then going to do an out lap, and then we're going to go again. Hamilton was like, look, just leave me out here, I'll do a cool down, it's fine, right? But they told him to box, maybe because of fuel load or whatever. So Ferrari had the strategy, bring him into the box. Hamilton's then released, and it's not exactly like it was ideal. He went into a load of traffic, didn't have the ideal out lap situation, was a few seconds behind Charles Leclerc, and then Charles Leclerc, in the similar situation to what happened before, turns up to that same corner, this time locks up the inside front tyre, gets too trigger happy on the exit, loses the car, and beaches it on the right-hand side. The yellow flags come out. Hamilton comes through the same part of the track at the same time, and of course has to compromise his lap. Now, it did look like he went past Leclerc with quite some haste, right? Believing, you know, that, well, I can slow down a bit, but maybe I can still get away with it. I don't know exactly what the onboards will look like when the stewards look at them in detail, but he has been summoned to the stewards for a potential yellow flag infringement. That announcement may have become clear by the time that this video goes live, but we know the stewards do like to take their time. According to timing data, he was potentially up enough to get through Hamilton, right? He didn't have a great sector 1, but his mini sector data was enough to think that Hamilton, you know, may have had enough to make it through if not for the Charles Leclerc spin. So deeply unfortunate. I think the reality is, though, does it really matter, right? Like, even if Hamilton had made it through, okay, where would he have qualified? 7th, 8th, maybe something like that. You know, probably not enough from Ferrari's perspective. Max then comes up to the line and pretty much shakes his head and says, look, mate, the car's completely broken. It's totally undrivable right now. He was not having fun at all. Then we get into the final qualifying session. The soft tyres go on and Norris goes P1. Piastri locked up into turn 1, had a bad turn 1 that compromised his entire run. That cost him a good couple of tenths of a second. But again, great lap from Lando. Antonelli, though, was probably the real story here, because I don't know what it is with Kimi when you send him to a track that he's never driven at before in a sprint. But he turned up to Miami. I think this shows the talent of the kid, really. He turned up to Miami, never driven it before, did one practice session, sticks it on pole for the sprints. Turns up to Brazil, I don't think he's ever driven this circuit before, does one practice session and wasn't far off pole for the sprint. So, look, I think there's still a lot to come from Antonelli in his career. Exciting to watch today. He did a fantastic job. Verstappen then went purple sector 1. So Lando had gone purple sector 1 on his second run. He'd gone a 17.7. Max went a 17.7 even quicker. And you thought, oh my God, you know, here it is, right? Max is maybe going to make the miracle happen. But the problem is they were losing 4 tenths in the middle sector. Lando still went a smidge quicker than he was before. He did another lap that was better than anybody else did. Piastri did a lap that was 2 tenths down on that. So, you know, better from Piastri for sure. But he would have liked to have been second on the grid on the front row instead of having Antonelli between them. Russell did a pretty good lap. It nearly would have been good enough, but just not quite good enough in the final corner. So he ended up in 4th in the end, which is where everything finished. And Verstappen was even further down than that. He crosses the line in 6th behind an Aston Martin in the end after Russell goes slightly ahead. Leclerc again was just not even a factor really in this qualifying session today. It was all about McLaren versus Mercedes, and that's how it concluded. This is Max, by the way, after crossing the line. You can see visibly here him shaking his head in the foreground, frustrated with the way the car was performing, spoke to the media and said lots of vibrations, awful car, bouncing a lot. Besides that, no grip in the slow corners. It doesn't turn. There's no traction. So, yeah, not a happy man, Max. And with this being the result of qualifying, sprint qualifying, and Norris and Piastri likely to score excellent points tomorrow, it's going to put Verstappen even more so on the back foot. Not to say that it's over yet precisely, but we know that he needs another big weekend, and it's not started off on the right foot for him. As I say, Parc Fermé reopens after the sprint tomorrow, so they can change the car, they can try to improve the car, but on this evidence, it may not be enough. You can even see it here. Max was purple sector 1, his sector 2, 13th. He lost 4.5 tenths pretty much to Norris in sector 2. Norris was a tenth quicker than anybody else. Alonso was the only other man in that conversation. Even in the final sector, I mean, okay, Verstappen's half a tenth off Norris there. So, yeah, intrigued to your thoughts on that, as always, in the comment section below. Hamilton says, look, the yellow flags definitely didn't help. We tried, we thought we'd be quicker, we weren't. It's not good enough, basically. So this is what the weather looked like in Sao Paulo this evening. It's probably going to look rather different by the time the sprint comes around tomorrow. So very much intrigued to your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.